In the summer of 1762, on the grounds of a royal palace in Seoul, a wooden box sat in a courtyard under the July sun, roughly 4 feet square, solid pine. No decoration, no ventilation, no gaps in the panels. Inside it was the Crown Prince of Korea. He was 27 years old. His father, the king, had ordered him to climb in. Servants nailed and tied the lid shut. The chest stayed in that courtyard for 8 days, in temperatures that routinely passed 30 degrees Celsius. The prince's wife and the court historians both recorded what happened. Their accounts agree on the central detail. The prince's voice could be heard from inside the chest, begging, until the night of the 7th day. On the 8th day, the chest was opened. He was dead. The posthumous title his father granted him almost immediately translates to thinking of with sadness. This is the story of Crown Prince Sado, the prodigy. Sado was born on the 13th of February, 1735, inside Changgyeongung Palace. His father was King Jongjo, one of the most respected monarchs in Korean history. His mother was a royal concubine, Lady Hyegyong. Yongjo was 41 when his son was born, and the king's only previous male heir had died in infancy. At 14 months old, Sado was formally invested as crown prince. At 2, he was moved out of his mother's quarters and into a separate palace, surrounded by eunuchs and tutors. By every account, he was a remarkable child. Lady Hyegyong's memoirs record that, at 3 years old, presented with a tray of cookies stamped with Chinese characters, Sado specifically chose the ones marked with the characters for fortune and longevity. He understood what they meant. King Jongjo, who had spent his own life studying Confucian classics with monkish intensity, bragged about his son's brilliance to court officials, though that did not last. The fracture. The relationship between father and son broke in stages. The first fracture came around 1745, when Sado was 10 and suffered a serious illness that caused him to repeatedly lose consciousness. Yongjo, raised on a Confucian framework that treated physical weakness as moral weakness, did not respond with sympathy. He responded with disappointment. Once Sado recovered, the king's praise turned to public criticism. Though the boy was still a child by any modern standard, by his early teens he was being humiliated in front of court officials whenever he failed to perform a recitation perfectly. Court observers recorded that the prince visibly trembled in his father's presence. In 1744, at the age of 9, Sado had been formally betrothed to a girl from the powerful Pungsan Hong clan. She was 9 as well. Her name was Lady Hong, later known to history as Lady Hyegyong. She would outlive her husband by 54 years, dying at 81 in 1816, and would write the 4 memoirs that are now the most important first-person source for what happened inside that palace. By 1749, when Sado was 14, his father handed him a portion of the daily administrative work of the kingdom. Conservative officials in the dominant Noron faction watched for errors and reported them straight to the king. Then, in 1752, Sado read a Taoist text, a forbidden field for a Confucian crown prince, concerning a thunder god. According to Lady Hyegyong, he had a hallucination. He believed he physically saw the deity. He developed a phobia of storms, an obsession with avoiding any object that bore the relevant characters, and a set of rituals to ward off what he had seen. The mental illness had begun. The clothing phobia and the body count. What Lady Hyegyong documented in the years that followed is, even by the bleak standards of court history, exceptional. She gave one of his conditions a name. She called it rebuke, clothing phobia. In a court where every garment carried ritual significance, the simple act of getting dressed became a multi-hour ordeal. Lady Hyegyong wrote that for him to put on clothes, 10, 20, even 30 sets had to be laid out in advance. He would burn some of them, supposedly on behalf of one ghost or another. If a garment touched him wrongly, he flew into rage. If he managed to dress without incident, she wrote, one had to count it as luck. She called the affliction, in her own words, beyond description, a strange and mysterious affliction. The rage that began with garments did not stay with garments. By his early 20s, Sado was beating and killing the people around him, eunuchs, ladies-in-waiting, medical staff. After the death of Yongjo's principal wife, Queen Jongjo, Sado decapitated a eunuch. He carried the severed head into the inner chambers and forced his wife and her attendants to look at it. He killed at least one lady-in-waiting during a fit of clothing phobia rage in the act of being dressed. The historical consensus is that the dead numbered in the dozens. By 1760, Sado had begun sneaking out of the palace in disguise and committing random acts of violence on commoners in Seoul. He had also begun sleeping in a box that resembled a coffin, and then in a hole dug into the floor and covered with planks and dirt. In one of the few moments of lucidity Lady Hyegyong recorded, Yongjo asked his son why he killed his servants. Sado's answer was preserved. Quote, "Because I am hurt. I am hurt because you do not love me. And also, alas, I am terrified of you because you constantly rebuke me." The king's response was to threaten abdication. In Joseon court protocol, this was a weapon. The threat forced the entire court, including the prince himself, to prostrate themselves in the courtyard and beg the king to reconsider. It transferred the guilt of the king's misery onto the son. Yongjo used it again and again. Then, in the spring of 1762, the political situation changed. The memorial. On the 22nd of May, 1762 by the lunar calendar, an official named Na Gyong-eon submitted a confidential document directly to the king. It accused the crown prince of plotting to murder his own father. It listed the killings inside the palace, the unauthorized excursions to Pyongyang and to the Diamond Mountains, and alleged that Sado had been planning, with the help of court eunuchs, to seize the throne by force. For Yongjo, this was the end of the road. As long as Sado's madness had been a private palace problem, the king could ignore it. A formal accusation of treason in writing was different. Under Joseon law, if the crown prince were tried and convicted of treason, the punishment would not stop with him. His entire family would be tainted, including the king's beloved 10-year-old grandson, the boy who would one day take the throne as King Jongjo. The grandson was the future of the dynasty. Yongjo had to eliminate Sado without a criminal trial. Though there was another problem. Confucian law forbade the marking, mutilation, or shedding of blood from a member of the royal house. A crown prince could not be beheaded. He could not be poisoned through formal channels. He could not be strangled by an executioner, because the act of execution itself was a kind of stain. The king needed a method that would kill his son while leaving the royal body untouched. The 8 days. On the morning of the 4th of July, 1762, Yongjo summoned Sado to Munjongjeon Hall at Changgyeongung Palace. The summons was issued in front of a heavy military guard and most of the high-ranking ministers of the court. Yongjo formally stripped his son of his titles. He then ordered the prince to commit suicide, framing the order as Sado's final duty, to take his own life so that his 10-year-old son's claim to the throne could be preserved. Sado refused. He begged. He tried at one point to strangle himself with his own belt, and either failed or was prevented. The standoff continued for hours. Yongjo's patience ran out. He gave the order for a tuiju to be brought into the courtyard. A tuiju is a rice chest. In an ordinary Joseon household, it was a kitchen object, a thick-walled wooden box used to store uncooked rice, sealed tight to keep out moisture and insects. Pine panels, fitted joinery, a heavy lid, about 4 feet on each side. There were no gaps in the panels. When the lid dropped and locked, the inside of the chest was lightless and very nearly airtight. Sado was forced inside. The lid was nailed shut. It was tied down on top of the nails. The chest was placed in the courtyard. Then it was left there. July in Seoul averages 30 degrees Celsius and 78% humidity. Inside a sealed pine box with no ventilation, those numbers become unsurvivable in hours. Sado was given no water and no food. Any official, eunuch, or family member who attempted to open the chest, slip a cup of water through any seam, or otherwise relieve the prince's suffering, would be executed for it. Lady Hyegyong was inside the palace. So was Sado's mother. So was the 10-year-old grandson, Yi-san, the future King Jongjo. They could hear him. The official annals of the dynasty record the duration. The prince's voice could be heard from inside the chest until the night of the 7th day. He begged. He cried out. He responded when spoken to. On the morning of the 8th day, the 12th of July, 1762, the chest was opened. Crown Prince Sado was dead. The cause was the inevitable physiological cascade of starvation, dehydration, and hyperthermia. Modern Korean historiography is firm on one point that often gets blurred. The choice of the rice chest was not improvisation. It was a legal device. Yongjo could not formally execute his son without destroying the dynasty in the process. Though the chest killed the prince, it left the body untouched, unmarked, and bloodless. By the strict letter of the law, no execution had taken place. A man had simply died inside a box. The son. And now, back to the palace. Yongjo's grief, by every account, was immediate. Within days of the death, he restored Sado's royal titles and granted him the posthumous name by which history would remember him, Sado, meaning thinking of with sadness. This was dynastic engineering as much as it was mourning. By restoring Sado as a royal, rather than leaving him as an executed criminal, Yongjo allowed Lady Hyegyong and the young grandson to legally remain inside the royal family. 2 years later, the king ordered Yi-san to be legally adopted as the son of Crown Prince Hyegyong, Yongjo's first son, the boy who had died in infancy 3 decades earlier. On paper, the future King Jongjo was no longer the son of a man who had been sealed inside a rice chest. The lineage had been laundered. Yongjo died in 1776. Yi-san took the throne as King Jongjo. His first declaration to his terrified court was a single sentence, quote, "I am the son of Prince Sado." His 24-year reign became a quiet, magnificent project of rehabilitation. He could not openly accuse his grandfather of murder. To do so would have collapsed his own claim to the throne. Instead, he built. In 1789, he moved his father's remains to Mount Hua in Suwon. To protect the new tomb, he built Hwaseong Fortress, completed in 1796, Korea's first planned city, an architectural act of filial piety. In 1795, for his mother's 60th birthday, Jongjo ordered an enormous, highly publicized procession to Suwon. It lasted exactly 8 days. Scholars now read the duration as a deliberate inversion, the 8 days of the festival mirroring the 8 days his father had spent inside the chest. It was during this period, in 1795, that Lady Hyegyong sat down at the age of 60 and began to write. Her 4 memoirs, composed across the next decade, are the most clear-eyed first-person record we have of a royal mind coming apart. In the 19th century, conspiracy theories began to circulate that Sado had been a sane reformer, framed by court factions, though modern scholarship rejects this entirely. Both Lady Hyegyong's memoirs and the official annals, independent records produced by people with very different motives, describe the same man, a prince suffering from what would today be diagnosed as severe bipolar disorder with psychotic features, genuinely, dangerously ill. The horror of the rice chest was not that an innocent man was killed in it. The horror was that a father, an entire court, and 400 years of law all converged on the same answer. The only way to save the dynasty from the heir was to put him inside a wooden box and walk away. In 1899, the Korean Empire posthumously elevated him to the rank of emperor. The first character of his title is still the one his father gave him on the day the chest was opened. It still translates to thinking of with sadness.